curses have long captured the human imagination, weaving tales of mysterious retribution and supernatural vengeance. From ancient times to modern folklore, these ominous forces have been intertwined with the fabric of human history, leaving behind a trail of eerie tales and inexplicable occurrences. Ancient Egyptian curses stand out as some of the most infamous, with stories of wrathful pharaohs and tomb desecration sending shivers down the spines of adventurers and historians alike. Perhaps the most renowned of these curses is that of Tutankhamun's tomb, where those who dared to disturb the slumber of this young pharaoh were said to face dire consequences. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. Back in September of 1991, something pretty extraordinary happened in the Alps of Austria. They stumbled upon an ancient mummy. But little did they know, this discovery might have sparked one of the eeriest and seemingly deadly curses in recent memory. And here's the strange thing. This curse? Well, it might not be done claiming lives just yet. Talk about a cold case. The curse of the Otzi mummy seems like a modern day manifestation of an ancient promise for payback. We've all heard about those spooky curses associated with Egyptian mummies, right? Take Tutankhamun's tomb for instance. It became infamous for apparently unleashing its wrath after being opened up back in 1925. The guy who bankrolled the entire expedition, Lord Carnarvon, had a really strange turn of events after the discovery. He got seriously sick in the months that followed, landing himself in a Cairo hospital. The doctors there figured it was just some nasty infection from an insect bite, but things took a sinister turn when he kicked the bucket just a few days later. Legend has it that right as he breathed his last, Cairo was hit with a blackout, and further still, when the time of his father's death was confirmed, Lord Carnarvon's son revealed that at that very moment the family dog let out a sorrowful howl and then dropped dead. Just to add further twist to this affair, when the body of Tutankhamun was examined, an insect bite was discovered on the young pharaoh's left cheek. The insect bite that led to Lord Carnarvon's fatal infection was in the exact same spot. By 1929, a total of 11 people had met with a suspicious end. This would include a relative of Lord Carnarvon, Lord Westbury, who was so traumatised by the apparent curse that he would eventually take his own life. Whether matters regarding the Otzi mummy reach similar heights remains a question. Back in September of 1991, a couple of German adventurers, Helmut and Erika Simon, were trekking through the rugged Otzi Alps, straddling the border of Austria and Italy. Little did they know that they were about to stumble upon something extraordinary. At an altitude of just over 10,000 feet, they stumbled upon what seemed like another climber who had met a tragic fate on the mountain. The body was half encased in ice, only revealing his head and torso. Shaken by their discovery, they wasted no time in alerting the authorities. The next day, they returned to the site with a police team to try and recover the body, but it wasn't going to be easy. Despite their efforts, the icy grip of the mountain refused to let go of its chilling hold on these remains. Mother Nature had other plans too. A mysterious and sudden snowstorm enveloped the area, throwing a curveball with sudden weather changes that forced them to postpone the rescue mission. 2 days later, the crew, along with the Simons, made their way back up to the site, this time accompanied by a bunch of curious onlookers and heavy media coverage. They finally managed to extract the body, along with various tools and artefacts found nearby, and laid them out on the ground for everyone to see. It was quite the spectacle, with cameras flashing and people buzzing with excitement. The remains were then whisked away to the University of Innsbruck in Austria for closer examination. And well, let's just say they were in for a wee shock. Once they found Otzi, they named him after the Otzi region where he was discovered and got him out of that glacier. It was pretty obvious to the authorities that this wasn't just some hiker who got lost recently. I mean, the dude had been stuck in that ice for thousands of years, so naturally he was mummified and all dried up, but surprisingly well preserved. He wasn't wearing any latest hiking gear like you would expect. Instead, he was sporting a cloak made from woven grass, along with leggings, a coat, a loincloth, and some primitive shoes, all crafted from animal hides and stitched together with sinew. It was immediately apparent that Otzi had been there for quite a long time. After a brief border dispute over whether or not the discovery of the mummy occurred in Austria or Italy, it was determined that Otzi was the property of northern Italian province of South Tyrol. But the local government agreed to lend him to the Innsbruck University, a college in neighbouring Austria, so that he could be properly examined there. This could have been one of the most important archaeological finds in Innsbruck history, but the magnitude of this discovery was soon overshadowed by something even stranger: the deadly curse that Otzi appeared to have brought down from the mountain with him. So, those brainy folks over at Innsbruck University did some serious digging into Otzi's remains. Through extensive autopsies and x-rays, they've painted a pretty vivid picture of who this guy was before he became an ice mummy. It turns out that he stood around 160 centimetres tall, roughly 5'3" for us modern folks, and despite his freeze-dried state tipping the scales at only 30 kilograms, scientists figured that he likely weighed around 50 kilograms or 110 pounds when he was strutting around in the flesh. Nowadays, 5'3" might seem a bit on the shorter side, but back in the Neolithic era, that was probably right smack bang in the middle of average. According to skeletal analysis, it seems that Otzi was about 45 years old when he met his icy fate. Since his big reveal in the 1990s, archaeologists have been getting all fancy with 3D scanning and forensic reconstruction technology. They've even conjured up a digital image of what they believe his face would have looked like. A dude with a beard, deep brown eyes, and a face that's seen its fair share of weathering. To be fair, he looked pretty seasoned for a 45-year-old, but hey, life was rough back then, so it makes sense that he would wear these marks of experience. Otzi also had a surprisingly large amount of tattoos. He was like a walking canvas with a whopping 61 tattoos to be exact. These tats were mostly sets of parallel lines coming in different widths. They were mainly down his legs, but he did have a few scattered on his arms and back also. So let's talk about how Otzi got all this ink done. It wasn't exactly like walking into a modern tattoo parlour with all those buzzing machines. His tattoos were the result of what we would call today a stick and poke technique. Basically, they would poke tiny holes in his skin and then rub pigment into them. Microscopic analysis showed that they likely used soot from a fire for the pigment, and judging by the darkness and vibrancy of his tattoos, it seems that Otzi wasn't a one and done kind of guy. Evidence suggested that he probably went back multiple times for touch-ups throughout his life. Back in the day when Otzi was first discovered, he was hailed as the oldest mummy rocking tattoos. But in 2018 they found some inked up mummies in Egypt from around the same era. When they took a wee peek at Otzi's x-rays and examined his bones, they found some really interesting stuff. It turns out his skeleton was showing signs of wear and tear, with all sorts of age and stress related conditions like osteochondrosis and spondylosis, especially in his spine and leg bones. The spots on his body where he got these tattoos actually coincide with areas where he had these bone issues. It's like he was using the tattoos as some sort of ancient remedy for pain relief, which is pretty fascinating if you ask me. The damage in Otzi's skeleton lines up almost perfectly with where he had his heaviest tattooing. It makes you wonder if those tattoos were like ancient acupuncture of sorts. It turns out 9 of his 19 tattoo clusters hit spots that we still jab in modern acupuncture and acupressure. The ancient practice of acupuncture started in China approximately 3,000 years ago. The first documentation of acupuncture that described it as an organised system of diagnosis and treatment is in a medical text called the Yellow Emperor's Classic of Internal Medicine, which dates back to 100 BCE. Otzi was rocking these tattoos a good couple of millennia before acupuncture even got a shout out in any Chinese history books. Not only did those x-rays reveal Otzi's skeletal troubles, but they found evidence of violence, and a lot of it. An arrowhead discovered still lodged in his left shoulder matched up with a little tear in his jacket. The location of the arrow suggested a wound that would have been fatal even if Otzi had been able to access modern medicine. The arrow had shattered his scapula and caused severe damage to his nerves, lungs and blood vessels. Further analysis of Otzi showed that he had what seemed to be defensive wounds, bruises and cuts to his hands, chest and wrists, and a deep cut to his thumb, which happened so close to his time of death that no healing had a chance to occur. There were also signs of cerebral trauma, indicative of a serious blow to the head. The most widely accepted theory is that Otzi died of blood loss, and that based on his posture, his body was handled by someone else before rigor mortis had time to set in. Whoever killed Otzi flipped him onto his stomach in order to retrieve the shaft of the arrow, some broken remains of which were found still lodged in the wound. With the latest DNA analysis, they found out that Otzi was practically a walking crime scene. His gear wasn't just stained with his own blood, they found traces from at least 4 other people. One person's blood was found on his trusty hunting knife, another's clinging to the shoulder of his coat, and to top it off, 2 different blood types splattered on one of his arrows. The interpretation of this evidence was that some time before his death, Otzi stabbed one person, shot 2 people with the same arrow, and then carried a 4th person over his shoulder, with the most common theory being that this 4th person was a fallen comrade. One of the most common theories for why Otzi was killed there was that he was a human sacrifice, which is a theory supported by the discovery of similar wounds on bodies from that same time period, found in peat bogs. Here's where things start to get real speculative. Some folks reckon Otzi wasn't just your average Joe. They think he might have been a big shot, like a chief or something. But there's another school of thought. Maybe he met his end in a fight, or was murdered by whoever left their DNA all over his personal items. Archaeologist Alessandro Vanzetti of Sapienza University in Rome theorised that Otzi might have been killed at a lower altitude, and his body brought to a higher altitude to be buried in the snow there. They discovered several stones near to Otzi set out in a specific formation. Vanzetti and his team believe that these stones are the remnants of some makeshift grave disturbed by glaciers over the years. Most other scientists aren't buying that theory at all. They're calling out Vanzetti's theory, saying that it's just all fluff and no substance. Regardless of whether he was killed on that mountain or killed somewhere else and then dragged up there afterwards, Otzi's death was violent, and it seems that his life was as well. This feels like a textbook case of a dark ritual and a violent death leading to a restless spirit, stalking and punishing all those who disturbed his remains. As the investigation into the Otzi mummy continued, so did the controversy over who had the right claim over this discovery, the Austrian or the Italian government. But that wasn't the only drama unfolding. Some eerie incidents started cropping up, with sudden and mysterious deaths striking those who had some tie to the mummy or its finding. The first casualty was Rainer Henn, a 64-year-old forensic pathologist from Innsbruck University. Henn had been one of the first to lay hands on the remains and had a hand in extracting them from the ice. He was also responsible for prepping the mummy for its journey to the university. Tragically, he met his end in a car accident just a few years down the line. What's even spookier than that though, he was en route to give a lecture about this mummy when the fatal accident occurred. Shortly after Henn's untimely demise, Kurt Fritz, aged 52, who had been instrumental in leading the search teams to that spot after the Simons' initial report, well, he met his end in an unexpected avalanche. What made it even more chilling was that he was the sole fatality among the entire team that he was working with that day. Even the poor cameraman wasn't safe. Rainer Holz, the cameraman who had captured the mummy's extraction and was involved in documenting its discovery for a documentary, he received some devastating news. See, out of the blue, he was diagnosed with a brain tumour. Sadly, he didn't have much time left after that, passing away shortly after receiving the diagnosis. In October 2004, Helmut Simon, one of the folk who stumbled upon the Otzi mummy, went for a hike in the Gamskorgel mountain range in Austria, but sadly he never made it back. Some speculate that he was growing increasingly bitter about not getting any financial compensation or even proper recognition for the initial discovery. 8 days later, his body was discovered. It appeared that he had fallen victim to a sudden blizzard, losing his footing and plunging a staggering 300 feet to his death from a ledge above. What's really creepy about this one is the fact that when his body was discovered, he was face down in a stream in the exact same body position as Otzi. The string of bizarre deaths didn't end there though. Dieter Wernick, aged 45, who had led the search party for Helmut Simon, met a sudden and tragic end himself. Just hours after Simon's funeral, Wernick suffered a fatal heart attack, leaving everyone stunned by the strange timing. And the Grim Reaper didn't seem to take a break. Shortly after these events in 2004, Konrad Spindler, aged 55, another key figure in the Otzi saga, well, he passed away. Spindler had been one of the first scientists to really dig into the mummy's mysteries. Sadly, he battled multiple sclerosis, and complications from the condition eventually led to his demise. Now, some might brush off Spindler's death as a mere coincidence, but the scientist himself had a morbid sense of humour about it. He would joke that he would be the next victim of the curse, despite not believing in such things. But fate seemed to have a grim sense of irony. Shortly after Spindler's passing, another scientist entered the grim tally of mysterious deaths connected to the Otzi Iceman. Like Spindler, this scientist had delved deep into examining the remains and publicly scoffed at the idea of curses and suspicious deaths. Tom Loy, a 63-year-old American molecular archaeologist, played a pivotal role in the Otzi story during the mid-2000s. His groundbreaking work, especially his discovery of multiple blood types on the mummy's clothes and remains, well, that shed a light on the violent and bloody demise the Iceman likely faced. But here's where things take another creepy turn. Shortly after Loy's groundbreaking examinations, he also received a surprise diagnosis. Confirmation of a rare blood disease, which he would promptly die from. Now, what's really intriguing is the timing of Loy's diagnosis. It was back in 1992, just as he was diving into the Otzi research. It's enough to make you wonder if there's more to these coincidences than meets the eye. The investigation into the Otzi mummy is still ongoing, and it's yielding a treasure trove of insights into the past. As researchers delve deeper into the remains, they are uncovering a wealth of information. Now, when it comes to the so-called curse of the Otzi Iceman, opinions are divided. Some folks swear that there's something creepy going on here, while skeptics argue otherwise. They point out that, sure, these deaths might seem a lot, but when you consider the hundreds of people involved in the project, it's just a tiny fraction. Plus, they'll tell you there haven't been any other deaths linked to the similar studies. Well, at least not yet. The curse of the Otzi Iceman is just one of many spooky tales tied to ancient relics and people. Take for instance the discovery of the terracotta army in China by a group of farmers. While the find brought fame and fortune to the Chinese government, the farmers who initially stumbled upon it, they didn't share any of the wealth. Instead, many of them ended up drowning in debt for the rest of their lives. Sadly, 3 of them met tragic ends at a young age, with one even taking his own life. It's a stark reminder that sometimes uncovering ancient treasures comes with a price. If we dig a wee bit into the origins of curses and superstitions, like say Friday the 13th, we'll find some pretty eerie stuff. Take Jacques de Molay for example. He was the last official Grand Master of the Knights Templar, and his story is straight out of a horror flick. Back in 1314, King Philip of France ordered raids that led to Molay's arrest. He ended up spending 7 agonising years in captivity, enduring brutal torture before meeting his gruesome fate, burning alive at the stake. But here's where it gets really chilling. Just before he was engulfed by the flames, Molay didn't hold back. He unleashed a curse upon his executioners, including King Philip and Pope Clement V, who had stripped Molay and his order of their sacred duties. It's said that his curse haunted them till their dying days. Molay didn't mince words when he issued his warnings to King Philip and Pope Clement. He told them straight up that they'd have to face the consequences of their actions before God, and they'd have just a year and a day to do so. So, in April of 1314, barely a month after Molay's execution, Pope Clement passed away, and not long after that, King Philip met his own end, struck down by a fatal stroke while he was out hunting. So despite Otzi seemingly trying to stop them from beyond the grave, scientists have managed to uncover crazy amounts of detail about his life. The axe that he was carrying when he died had a blade made of pure forged copper. Even though copper was being mined in the Alps back then, analysis showed this copper didn't come from any local sources. It was from all the way over in Tuscany. The blade itself was pretty worn down, and the fact that he had this valuable axe suggests that Otzi was likely some big-shot chief or a high-ranking guy. He also seemed to have some health issues at the time of his death. For one, he had whipworm, an intestinal parasite infestation. This gives some context to another possession. A birch basket containing foraged berries and 2 types of fungi, one of which was a tinder fungus, probably used for lighting fires. The other was an edible birch fungus known to be used for treating parasite infections like whipworms that poor Otzi was dealing with. On top of being infested with worms, Otzi is considered the oldest recorded case of someone having Lyme disease. Scientists found the bacteria that causes it while sequencing his DNA. Speaking of his DNA, by the way, researchers fully mapped out Otzi's genome and published the data in 2012. His Y chromosome had this gene called GL91, which is mostly found these days in the South Corsica region. When they compared Otzi's DNA to over 3,700 blood donors, they discovered that he shared a common ancestor with 19 of those people. Those 19 individuals all had the same GL91 mutation, a gene that can be traced back to ancient Middle Eastern populations who spread it across Europe as they migrated and brought agricultural practices with them. So while we can't scientifically prove or disprove claims of a curse on his body, there's no denying that Otzi, the ice mummy, was one fascinating guy. Personally though, I think I'll let other people handle examining his remains, just to be on the safe side. That's it for this video, folks. Thanks for watching. Remember to stay safe out there, tell someone that you love them, and regardless of what's going on, keep smiling.